Welcome back, everyone, to the Op Show, where we bring you the trials and tribulations, the automations and collaborations from the world of DevOps and the developer experience. I'm your host, Tristan Pollock, with my co-host, CEO of CTO.ai, Kyle Campbell. And today, in our best show yet, we have Prosper Nwankpa, and he is the co-founder and CTO of Avanoo, and also was the founder and CTO of Peanut Labs. Prosper, thank you for coming on the show. Great to have you, and really excited about some of the topics and things we're going to talk about today. Welcome.
Sweet. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Tristan.
So give us a little bit of background about Avanoo and what you've been working on most recently, as well as, tell us your story and like how you got into, the being a technical leader for startups, Peanut Labs, Avanoo, how did that process happen? But yeah, would love to hear about both those things.
Absolutely. So, co-founder of Avanoo, built the team from the ground up. Avanoo today is a company that's focused on helping enterprise customers optimize their culture. The way we do that is through storytelling, and we have a platform that helps them drive through all these learning programs, while also gleaning data out of that data that comes out of that. So as people do these learning programs, they leave comments, they share their own stories, and so we look at that data, parse all of the text, parse all the video, and try to uncover signals to help us understand where their culture is going. Where is it going versus where they want it to go? Do they want people to, be more trusting than they actually are, or something different, right? So we actually glean that data that would otherwise only appear in surveys. We glean it automatically from communication that's happening within the team and communication that they're sharing through their stories, and we use that through NLP algorithms to try to help them understand how to constantly optimize their culture. Wow. So that's Avanoo, and and if you go back a few more years, I'm what you might call a serial entrepreneur. So Avanoo would be my third startup. The first one was a social network way back when social networks were a thing. Now it's just Facebook, right?
It's a tough business.
There's no industry anymore, literally.
Yeah. What was your market with this social network?
Yeah, if you can believe it, back then Facebook had about 12 million users, and my network had about 6 million users.
Wow.
Yeah, so we were pretty close to head, and what happened was Zuck ended up raising a lot more money, and they took off, and we got offered money, and we said, okay, I will take that money. Ended up getting acquired, but so that was the first startup I ever built. We were about 80 people back then, and we were tens of millions of users by the time we were acquired. Actually became profitable, which was not a thing back then. Yeah. Back then, you just generate as much traffic as you could, and then hope that you get acquired, or try to sell advertising. And then second startup is a company called Peanut Labs, where we took all of the different social networks that existed back then, lots of dating sites. I don't know if you remember Hot or Not. Probably dating myself with that one, but back in the, this was in around 2007, 2008. It's not unlike, it's like the first iteration of the dating apps that exist today, like the Grindr, right? But back then it was Hot or Not, so you could just swipe through pictures and say, I like you or I don't like you. And if there's
like the
a
original
match,
Tinder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If there's a match, you could send them a virtual flower. You can't really just walk up to their house like you can today with Tinder. But that's an example of the social networks that we helped to monetize. They had all these fun mechanics, but then they couldn't charge people money. So what Peanut Labs did was we aggregated hundreds of these guys and we said, hey, if you send us your users, we'll send you some cash. So basically we would convert their users' time, whether it was 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, into real cash for the business owner, but also virtual currency for the user so that they could have more fun in their game, whatever it was. So Facebook credits was another platform that we served back then when Facebook was experimenting with credits. We powered that. We enabled users to get free credits. And so at its peak, we were doing, I don't know, crazy amounts, like, hundreds of millions of users on the platform through all these different networks, and millions of transactions on a daily basis through that platform. So also got acquired, and then I ended up at Avanoo to build another startup with a really cool friend of mine that I've known for a long time, Daniel Jacobs. Tristan also happens to know that guy. But
yeah, we met through some weird circumstances of like both being in the social impact space, and I think really like over a decade ago. And I think I was helping with marketing and writing for his website, like Everyone, where it was doing converting digital actions into real money for causes, like planting trees for filling out a survey and things like that. And that was kind of a hot thing at that time in the social impact space of like, really low friction, easy things that anyone could do online, even passively. That was I'm happy you guys came together and then met you guys in San Francisco, around 500 startups. And it's great that you're still building this, really powerful angle at, in helping people improve their skills within a company. And I think that like that upskilling within companies and companies investing in that is really great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's needed. I mean, everybody wants to grow and become the better version of themselves. So we just help them do that.
How does the video play in? I'm not 100% clear on that. So I'm recording a video and sending it to somebody. Is that generally the idea? Or can you elaborate a little bit more on how the video is used as the primary driver of the communication?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Avanoo, one of the things we do, one of our products allows our customers who are in HR to develop a learning program. And that learning program would be a series of prompts. So let's say it's focused around, leadership training, or, for new managers, you might issue a prompt that focuses on one particular area of leadership training. So delegation, share an example of how you've leveraged delegation to make yourself more effective as a leader. And so people would share with each other. And then our technology would parse through all of that and try to glean insights about, how people are doing with that delegation. Do they feel positively about it? Do they not? Do they think they're strong with it? Do they not? And how are others connecting with delegation as a topic?
That makes sense. Yeah, so I could either proactively use it to sort of build out a broader curriculum that I might use for like onboarding many people into my business consistently, or I could use it more ad hoc for more of like a micro training scenario where, hey, we have some initiative, we're really trying to move the needle in these sorts of skills, so let's create some content around that. Great, that makes sense.
And so, going back to this, this upskilling, I think one thing that we've been chatting about already is this idea of engineering values, or building out values for your team and setting a foundation to, what you really care about and how you want, the team to interact with each other.
Right.
What are your thoughts on creating that foundation, these core values of a team?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things about culture that often is overlooked is culture, really simply defined, is the way that we work, right? When a group of people come together how you behave together so that you can achieve your mission, right? It is really what culture is, right? And so very often organizations let it happen, especially dev teams. They just say, okay, we're going to just get some stuff built. Let's do it. It's the other way to look at it is to really just sit down, take, and constantly be working on this, but look at what you want to achieve as a team and look at what are the things or the ways of working that can help you achieve that. Or what are the mindsets, ways of thinking, approaching your work that can help you achieve that. One example is, we want to, one value that I really like is we drive 10x leverage, right? This is a value that I use in my team, for example, where we say, we're going to deliver maximum impact with minimum effort. And what that means is whenever I'm doing my work, I'm going to always be thinking about how do I short circuit this problem, right? What is the laziest way that I can get it done while driving the most impact? Another one that I really like is, and it's really particularly important in a startup, is I call it building a rocket ship while flying it. Because you think that every startup wants to be that rocket ship. They want to be a unicorn, right? What they don't realize is we've shifted quite a bit from the age of we're going to go and build this thing and make it really beautiful, make it perfect, and test it and test it and test it, and theorize about it for a long time. Now in this age of like building something and releasing it very quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
The web has made it possible for you to run software and update it at the same time, right? So really embracing that, not just the dev team embracing it, but the customer service people, the customer success people, the sales people, like the concept of thinking about your product as an evolving thing versus let's wait till it has this and feature and this other feature and this other feature before we can sell it. Or let's wait till it has all these features before we can introduce it to customers, right? What is the minimum viable? And then how do you constantly start to update it based on feedback from your users? It's what I've noticed is the least intuitive thing about this whole aspect is what happens when you try to build a rocket ship while flying it. Things break, right? And sometimes, if you're a developer in that situation and things are, traffic is growing and things are constantly breaking because you're constantly building, there's a point where you start to feel like your team isn't good enough, right? Like maybe we can never do it. Maybe like we're too crappy of a team. But actually, it's inevitable for bugs to exist in your code, especially if you're constantly tweaking it. You can't just sit back and go, let me not build anything because then if I build something will break, right? Now, of course, the answer is not to always be breaking it. You're always going to build unit tests. You're always going to try to do things to prevent things from breaking, but you can't entirely rid yourself of software issues. And the second that you understand that, then you switch your mindset into building software that is fault tolerant, building a team that is fault tolerant across your whole organization, right? How do I stop trying to chase this dream of software that has no bugs and instead chase a dream of software that is resilient, a team powering it that is even more resilient, right? Anyway, I get really passionate about this
It's a
stuff.
beautiful way to communicate it. I have so many different, I guess, Twitter rants about this and over the years, and one of the things that I try to communicate, especially to senior engineers, because I don't think this bias exists so much in junior engineers, is don't worry about building it right. You have to build it wrong before you understand how to build it right, especially in an early stage business. And the second that you understand that your objective is not to build it right, you now have just empowered yourself. I often will say, and I think I tweeted about this recently, like I even go to the extreme of like embrace the bug. Those bugs, those things that are coming in are the data and the information that you need in order to determine what really matters about your software. And if you take the mindset that the requirements determine the bug, well, you're not acknowledging that the requirements are an assumption about what the user wants. So just go straight to the user. What does the user want? And when a user communicates something to you as a bug, just embrace that and accept it. And in some cases, you can even just acknowledge ahead of time, I didn't build that. I know it's going to be a bug. But guess what? That user is going to tell you now. I think there's this, and maybe I'd love to hear what you think about this, but I feel like there's this, it's not just about building it right sometimes with engineers. Sometimes there's something that I think is more important about what they're feeling, which is, I'm worried the user's going to hate it. And that the user's going to stop using it because of that bug. And understanding that the users that you want are the people who are feeling enough pain, who love it enough to get over that. And this is why we put a flag on it. That becomes a really hard thing for them to reconcile within their compromise. Do you see the same things when you're going through this coaching?
Absolutely. There's so much about and the many times I've built teams and built products, there's a big thing about understanding the whole concept of putting it out there early and getting that feedback really quickly, right? Like if people love your product so much that they're willing to overlook certain bugs, then you got a good product. If a tiny bug is the thing that turns them away, then you should be asking questions, really hard questions about, is this the right product? Is this really needed, right? If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? When you're hungry, you're not looking for self-actualization, right? When you're hungry, you need some food. And if the food is not necessarily your favorite food, you're still going to eat it, right? And you're really, really hungry, right? Especially if there's no other alternatives in the market. So that's it's a really important concept, because sometimes we use these other fluffy things like really great design, spend a lot of time on the logo and a lot of time making sure it looks snazzy. And then sometimes customers fall in love with that. And it takes them a little while to actually get behind that and think about the functionality, the need that they need to solve. And you need to shorten that time, the time it takes for you to get that signal about, is this useful or not, right? And I'm a strong believer that you don't necessarily leave bugs in there on purpose. It's really about getting it out there so fast that you're beating your competition to the game, and then you're fixing it so fast that your customer is now also seeing you working really hard to make the product better, right? And that gives them a sense of exactly.
I
so
100%
it starts to
agree.
build on itself.
The intersection of this, like you talked about culture and the way we work. I mean, one of the reasons we started CTO.ai is we kind of really believe in the core premise of DevOps is it's philosophies, best practices that you immortalize in tools. And the benefit of tools is it puts things on the guardrails, right? And if it's like, we agree that this is how we're going to work, well, now I don't have to retest those assumptions, and I can prioritize these other things that are more directly related to delivering that value quickly in that feedback loop. Does that, what kind of approaches do you use when it comes to the tools and how the tools set expectations, or the onboarding and the training? I used to have a radical, what I call the shocking rule, or Ben Horowitz actually calls a shocking rule, about everyone deploys on day one, because what I was trying to set is this cultural premise that our tools don't get in the way of us delivering on that commitment to the user. What kind of practices do you guys use to reinforce your cultural commitments?
Yeah, that's a good point. One practice that I like to think about is, or I really like to have the team reinforce with them, is whenever we can get away with not building something, let's freaking build it, right? Um, if we can buy something that's already been built so that we can get on with the business of actually solving our customers' problems, let's absolutely do that. We had, you know, we had a debate a few weeks ago about, you know, should we build this really sexy tool um, because our developer got excited about it. It's like, yeah, let's, you know, it'd be really cool to get that built. And then we go, uh, haven't other people built this before? Can we just leverage that and then apply that brain power to our business logic? And it's a really easy thing to overlook because once you know engineers get into it, it's easy to fall into the trap of let me build this thing because I know I can and I want to flex a little bit because you know I'm a builder, right? You know, I
Resume-driven
feel the
developer.
happiest when I build.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Right.
And sometimes you just need to take a break and step back a little bit and go, you know, hey, do we really need to be building that piece? Or can we just very quickly deploy something that's already built?
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of it is if 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 I'm in DevOps, if I have a DevOps team member, for example, and they're constantly responding to production issues, right? Like, hey, you know, this other thing happened, and I have to go deal with it manually, um, and that's constantly happening. You want to keep a lid on how much time your DevOps team spends in operations,
Yeah.
right? You want to actually track it and say, what percentage of our time do we spend building scalable tools that can help us better scale in the future versus answering like manually dealing with queries or manually, you know, hacking together quick solutions, right? You want to keep a lid on that because over time, it's only the things you build or the tools that you're leveraging that will help you that kind of minimize the time spent doing manual operations.
It's sort of like a cost of ownership kind of equation that you're running there as you're listening to
Exactly.
these feedback loops.
Yeah, and we have an actual like we have a meeting that we do every 2 weeks where we say, okay, what all issues have come up, and what are the things we need to build? Because if you let that thing happen naturally, it may not. Um, so one practice we do is just we just revisit it and look at our tickets that we answered most recently, and we say, which of these do we need to build something for, and kind of postmortem our tickets so that we are constantly reducing, like you said, the cost of ownership. So
Yeah, that's great. We run a retro process where essentially I think it's every week actually, we get the team to just, what's going well, what's not going, it's going kind of like not so it's going okay, and what's going bad. And it kind of gives a
mhm,
broad scope of feedback to leadership to then say, okay, well, obviously this keeps coming up. So this is something that we need to potentially prioritize because if it's distracting people this much, the cost of ownership equation is kind of unbalancing. But we sort of
right.
lean towards, well, let's do things lean, let's do things manual, because you have to really, I think, figure out what is that cost of ownership tipping point for you to make those additional investments and maintain this
Mhm,
minimalist ideology about anything you build, because the less you build ultimately, in my opinion, the better in some cases.
yep, yep,
Which maybe is counterintuitive in some ways, but I think when you're running businesses, you start to realize that any energy you spend in any direction could be the
oh,
wrong
dude,
one. So
yep.
high signal, no noise, or high signal, no low noise is usually what I always preach.
Yeah, absolutely. um, yeah, but what's more important sometimes is what you choose not to build
Right.
than what you choose to build. It's, it signals to your team where their efforts should be, and that's really powerful. So,
So along those lines, as you're thinking about, how to guide your team, what to build, what not to build, like, and you're balancing this, buy, build, the cost of ownership equation that Kyle was mentioning. How do you think about, still challenging your team and keeping them happy as far as an engineering or development team, so that there are interesting things and interesting problems and challenges, but how do you think about focusing that and motivating your team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important, first of all, to conduct one-on-ones. It's to some in this circle, it's an obvious one. It's like, sit down with your developers one-on-one on a weekly basis at least, and talk to them about what they're dealing with. How they're feeling, how they think, whether they think they're being fully harnessed for their skill set or not. Understand, you know, whether they're blocked or not in what they're doing. Make sure that they are solving problems they think are worth solving, right? Very often we take ideas only from the product guys and the designers, and the engineers get left behind and they're just told to build it. But pulling them into the process early on is really good. So that's all like part of kind of an ongoing thing, but then more of on a quarterly basis. There's a conversation that I like to have with the developers where I try to understand what really interests them in terms of, forward looking, what they want to be doing. What do they want to learn, right? Like so many, the best engineers are always looking to learn stuff. And the ideal is to find that match between what the business needs and what your developer wants to learn, right? And you want to always keep them just at the edge of competency, right? You don't want them to be doing something that they're going to glaze over at because they've done it like 15 million times now. But you always want to keep an eye for, how challenged are they right now, and throw them not too deep in the deep end, but just deep enough that they're having to figure their way through things. So having that conversation at least on a quarterly basis to say, the things you're working on now, are they sufficiently challenging? And the things that you want to work on, how can we plan ahead so that we can be having you learn the new technologies that you're excited about, whether it's as a part-time project, like a 20% type thing, or let's find ways to put you together with the things that you want to learn, right? When all else fails, I find that there's a certain percentage, like let's say, depending on, again, on the startup, there are times when you're going to look and you realize that they really want to work on certain technologies, but you're not there yet, right? You don't have that need in the business yet. What do you do? Developers can usually either grow by building more and more challenging things and learning technology, or they can grow by managing other developers. Some developers are excited about that. A lot of developers I've managed have always jumped at that opportunity, right? Of being able to lead a project, even if they're not quote unquote in the manager role. Mm-hmm. I find that whenever I can help my developers expand their scope of what they're thinking about in terms of their work, right? They go from just thinking at the lowest level, thinking about, okay, it's been architected, now I'm going to code it, right? Expand it further a little bit out to say, okay, how do I architect this the right way so that it actually solves and scales as I build, and it's maintainable, it's all the good things. That's the next level of scope. The scope beyond that is, how do I take a product and, like a sprint, like a user story that's been, whether it's designed or what have you, and how do I take that from top to bottom, like deliver the actual build, right? That's a step up for a lot of developers. And then the one above that is, how do I even understand the feature set I'm building? How do I understand the problem set for the customer? Actually thinking about the customer, and then working with your, your dev team members to corral the build, right? Just make sure you're running a Scrum meeting and managing the checklist, checking and adjusting to make sure we're hitting the deadline, and so on and so forth, right? So you can see how you're constantly, like, there's always the next layer up of responsibility. And when you get to that higher level where they're actually thinking about the customer needs, that is I think where a lot of developers really start to shine, because you are giving them a view, a perspective of the customer problem. And again, this may be obvious to a lot of people listening, but the second that you give, kind of glean and understand the customer problem, they feel more powerful. They feel more respected in their work. They feel more responsible and accountable, right? And they're going to give you a better product because of that, right? You give them that trust to say, I trust you to be able to factor in all these things, and to make the right build as part of that. It might seem in some ways that they're not attending more meetings. That's one thing you're gonna give up with that, right? But then again, at the same time, it forces them to be more effective with their time, right? That's what I found. But those are some of the ways that I think about, helping developers constantly be maturing into the next step.
Yeah, that's a really incremental scope too. When you think about the progression of experience, my view has always been that experience is relative, and you have someone like you who has the experience of building these businesses in the past, obviously at a quite large scale. You have that scope of being able to see what the full forest looks like through the trees, and you're trying to give them that path. One of the things that we do is similar to you with product office hours. We try to bring the engineers into the product discussions and get them involved, and make sure their voices are heard, and be very inclusive in that way. I think there's lots you can do within that context or that kind of scope, but I think one of the things that's inherently challenging in any growing organization is specifically this topic of scale. And there's no more that I feel like experience is more relative than scale, because you usually have it or you don't. And when you have it, you understand all of the challenges and can look back with 2020 vision and go, "Oh darn," right? But when you don't, you're building for this unknown. And I think one of the challenges generally in engineering culture is, like, we're expected to be smart, we're expected to know the answer, and we often end up, instead of putting this imposter syndrome to the side and saying this is what the best practices are based on the literature, right, or what Google says. How do you communicate, again, that expectation of scale, right? Because I think that's one of the things that people really have no understanding of. We just don't understand intrinsically the law of a compounding effect, and really what that means. How do you think about setting people up for that journey? Because that's when, ultimately I've seen the cracks start to show within anybody's experience, and they start to see those really true realities of, okay, this is now my horizons are really expanding, and I can understand why the decisions I might have made then, how they're important now.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I like to do is, because engineers that are just starting out or young, like kind of earlier in their careers, yeah, you're right, tend to not have that experience. The ones who do have it, I like to do pairings, right? Like, whether it's for code reviews or for pair programming, pair more junior developers with more senior developers, so that, as you're writing, as more junior folks are committing their code, they're having someone look over it and say, that query there is going to have an n+1 issue, right? How, let's think through how you can make that more effective. So code reviews are a really critical way to catch a lot of scaling problems before they go out to production. That's been the most effective I've seen anyway. Like, have someone who has that experience be part of the kind of either it's pair programming code review experience, um, and then have a what I call like a big part of scale in my mind is as you scale teams, scale your platform, uh, figuring out how to build more frameworks is a really important approach for me. Even in your business application, how do you isolate things that are highly reusable? How do you build things in a way that they're highly as reusable as possible? And then how do you make it so that people reuse it, right? It's one thing for one developer to sit in the corner and go, I can build this module in a way that we can use it in the future. And then when they're done building it, it kind of, gathers dust in their own implementation of it, and it never goes beyond that, right? So how do you develop a sharing culture where, developers are sharing with each other the things they're building to help ease, the scaling problem over time, right? And how do you then promote, just kind of continuously promote that? So that's another aspect for me of scaling. You build as much reusable as possible, and then you have a culture of teaching. The ones who know teach the others, and the ones who are learning get to um, experiment as they learn, kind of in a safe environment with, you know, with maybe adapting what's been built for the future and so on.
Yeah, safe environment I think is super key because of that bias to like I need to know the answer to this. I haven't done it before. What if it scales? And not really having a clear sense of what scale is relative to current trajectory. I think giving people that opportunity to go, I don't know what I don't know. Like, please tell me.
Right.
It's so important. It's so
It's
important to
critical.
people's growth.
Yeah. Yep. And scale is one of those things that is hard to, you can learn a lot in theory, but you don't really you're not gonna know for real how to, how to build for scale until you've been through scale,
Yeah,
right? Like you,
chicken egg.
yeah.
And often there's a
Yeah,
lot of problems at
exactly.
scale that you can't solve until you're at scale,
Until
and you're
you're
trying to
there.
solve them before that. So it becomes this very house of cards thing where the approach
Yep.
I've always thought of is just be very adaptable, and to your point, like having that culture of learning and wanting to learn and being able to troubleshoot. Troubleshooting is one of the skills. I
Oh
started
yeah,
doing
that's
tech
big.
support, and so learning how to troubleshoot and think through a problem very rapidly and work backwards based on what's the easiest way to get their internet working again is
Yep.
something that served me so well in my career because I can then quickly say, okay, here's the path of most positive impact with the least amount of effort, and let's try to
Mm,
achieve that, and hopefully we solve it sooner than later. Otherwise our time investment's going to be high. I think troubleshooting is one of those unappreciated skill sets often,
yeah,
whether it comes to how do I
absolutely.
build things or how do I fix them when they're at scale, right?
Yep, yep. That is, I mean, I've seen it so many times. Like, sometimes engineers just freeze, right? They're like, that sounds like a ghost problem to me. I
Build it
don't
my
know where to
machine.
even begin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
um, and just having even the approach of, okay, let's start somewhere.
yeah.
Let's process of elimination, right? Like one of the least appreciated tricks in my book, anyway.
It's a bit of a like
Um,
trigonometry or I don't know, math, like process of elimination, like order of operations. Like I feel like people who have strong
yeah.
math constructs tend to look at the world in this way, and I think it's one of the things that we as a generally as a engineering culture out there in the industry, I think we could do better at enabling developers to find their path to mean time to resolution, easier because that's the
Hmm.
most stressful thing that I've ever
Oh
come
yeah,
across as a
it
software is
is.
like the system's going down, nobody knows the
Yep.
answer, somebody has to take the
Nobody
steering
knows.
wheel, right?
Yep, yep, absolutely. It's the fear is the biggest problem, right? It's like false evidence appearing real. Like you think like the immediate thought is, oh yeah, this is an impossible one. Sorry, not gonna even, right? That right there, you just like blocked yourself from the solution versus, oh yeah, there's probably something going on that you can track down if you just try, right?
Yeah.
And right there, you are instantly 80% of the way there. And then you just start, look at the logs or, look at where the thing stopped or whatever, right? But the first step I've noticed is we're our own biggest enemies in that sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's
Is that big mental block.
a quote that somebody gave to me in the past, a great guy named Charles Buckingham. He had this general rule that he would share with engineers. He called it "Be kind to your future self." And the way that I think
Mm-hmm.
about that in this capacity are things like small incremental pull requests deployed from the feature branch, so that when something breaks, all I gotta do is isolate what's in
Track
the
it
pull
down.
request. And
Yep.
and if you get into these habits of how you work, well then, in that moment when it all blows up, you're gonna thank yourself.
So much easier.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Um, yeah. Very helpful.
So we've been talking, we've kind of looked at the team level, we've looked at like the company level with scaling. You were also really into like maximizing your individual self in the sense of a flow state. Tell us a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about some of the things you're doing, Prosper, with flow state. How do you optimize your time?
Yeah. No, that's huge. There are a couple of like angles. You know how things, it's like Steve Jobs said that the dots will only connect later, right? So there were a couple of things in my life that have happened. One is I had kids at the peak of like building one of my startups. And when you have kids and they're young and they need your attention quite a bit, at the same time you've got to build things, right? You kind of tend to, the kids start to become a forcing function, right? If you get to shower them at 7 and you got 30 minutes, what are you going to do? You got to get that work done, right? So you can go do what you need to do. So that's one thing that I experienced, but it didn't really quite click until I ran into this system called the Pomodoro system. And when I used the Pomodoro system, it was developed by some guy in Italy who actually hacked his own ability to concentrate. Um, and it finally made sense what I was doing subconsciously when I was trying to, there it is, when I would try to finish my work quickly so that I could, spend time with my kids. Um, and essentially, he would set this clock, and you can have it ticking or not. But essentially, you tell yourself, I want to do X by the end of this time block. And, he experimented with starting at 2 minutes, then going to 3 minutes, and so on, until he hit the peak of focused concentration stretch of 25 minutes. And he found that he couldn't go beyond 25 minutes. Personally, for me, it so happens 25 minutes is great as well. But what I've noticed, and I will swear by this, like I've had so many situations where, man, that like in my mind that it's like we talked about mentally blocking the problem or trying to escape the problem, whether it's like an architectural problem or something I have to debug or just figuring out the um, the insight that leads to a solution, the stroke of insight that we're like, oh, duh, that's what the issue is, right? I have had moments where I will spend hours you know, like stored away in my head thinking that this problem won't be solved anytime soon. And then I will sit down and give myself a Pomodoro, and in 25 minutes, it's done. Like 99.9% that I've set a target, and said, in 25 minutes, I'm going to do it. There's no deadline. Nobody's going to kill me if I don't do it. And yet somehow my mind clues into that and it goes, all right, let's get to work.
Wow.
And boom, 25 minutes later. I don't know if I'm the only one who experiences this. I've seen my developers do this as well. Um, but I think it's real. And there's something going on with our heads where forcing functions are really, really powerful. And then when I stretch that out, right, I noticed that it also applies with even when you're not like specifically saying, okay, here's a Pomodoro. You say to your dev team, okay, here's a push we gotta get out. Here's what we want to get done. Let's meet back here at noon and see how far we get. Let's try to get it done by noon, right? Pulls in a forcing function, and magically, you will notice more productivity when you just even set that intention to be done by X time, right? Somehow your brain starts to, pull the resources because it knows suddenly it has,
Yeah, it feels the urgency, and now it clicks on,
exactly,
and
it
it's
wants
like
to just go, right?
The quote
that's
that
like
comes
the
to mind is creativity comes from constraint. I've heard this quite often. Is that
Yep.
and I think the reason for that is, you do get that extra focus. You're tapping into more of your concentration. And I think for many kinds of problems that's more effective. But what's interesting about this is that on the alternative, I also seen a lot of times and experienced in my own personal experience where I actually need more passive thought to work the problem out. And that might manifest in like, well, I've been working on this for 8 hours. I'm going to go for a walk.
Yep.
And I'm going to think about
Yeah.
something else, or shower
Agreed.
thoughts, or you wake up in the middle of the night, you're like, I got it, eureka. And like, there's something just about unlocking that creativity in different circumstances, I think. And sometimes it's about forcing the constraint because you need to just focus. And in other times it's like, you need your passive brain to be able to work through some of these data points, to work through maybe the mental fog of the situation because it's dynamic.
You know what? I've actually, someone told me this a while ago. He says your brain can go to work when you're asleep.
Yeah.
And I've actually used that to my benefit many, many times where there's something bugging me and I just think about it right before I go to sleep. And I go, here's the setup. And then I wake up with a solution, right? It's your brain is actually actively, trying to figure that thing out. So you're absolutely right. The passive one or option is also viable.
And it wants to learn too.
I
mean, one of the things I've done, and this might be a little bit crazy, so I'm gonna admit it here, is I wanted to develop certain habits, certain mindsets about how I thought about business, about how I was setting my goals and pursuing my goals, and build sort of discipline would be a great example. So, I started using sort of as I'm going to sleep, I started using this process of blocking out light, blocking out all stimulation other than just certain types of input. And usually that input would be something that would be, a video or an audio track where it's specifically talking about certain types of things that I wanted to try to ingrain into my my passive consciousness or passive bias. I don't know, whatever it is. But I started trying to retrain certain parts of what it was, and to a large degree, I had a lot of luck. I don't know that I got the best sleep always, but I certainly would wake up in the morning having a different sort of baseline premise of how I was looking at that problem. And so it wasn't even just about those short-term things that I was trying to address. There was techniques that I was trying to develop around how I could build more of that into my long-term problem solving and my long-term sort of like goal of how I want to operate within a certain set of constraints that are maybe bigger, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
I don't know what the formal psychology on any of this would be. I don't have a method or a wiki page that I can point to this. I just was curious about if I could achieve that, right? Just, hey, you exercise. Why can't you exercise your brain as well, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a book called Think and Grow Rich, right? And when I first was reading through that book, I thought, this guy must be crazy. Like, why is he proclaiming that we can do all these amazing things? And it was only after I finished the book and reflected on it, I realized that if you want to achieve something, at first, when you think about it, it seems foreign to you, right? So, of course, it's more impossible. But the more you visit that thing, the more that you just even think about it, you'll notice that over time, you become more accepting of whatever the challenge is that you have to go through, right? And over time, that's literally what he was talking about. He was saying, you think yourself into the future that you want. It's really just giving your subconscious mind time to process and accept it and start to work its way towards a solution. And you don't even have to like have powerful willpower to approach that. It's just like a steady approach of, okay, now I'm going to think about it again, and I'm, just giving yourself exposure to that goal. And that's why repetition really works when you think about your team. Like, set a goal with your team and you talk about it often. What do you know? The team actually is starting to focus on and work towards that goal, right? So there's probably like 2 hours of, scintillating conversation behind this one, but
no, it's really interesting because you think about like lucid dreaming, where you like can control yourself in a dream like you would in real life, or other mental models around this kind of like programming the brain. And I think it makes a lot of sense, and there's probably a lot more research that could go into it, or even like aggregating that sort of research together so that it's you're defining that. It's like visualizing. A lot of times I think that's a common tactic, is like visualizing what you're about to do, visualizing what you're going to say in this meeting, visualizing your presentation. So there's a lot of interesting factors around that. Well, absolutely. Prosper, it's been a wonderful conversation. We're almost at the end. Any last thoughts?
Oh boy. I would just say, one of the things that I find myself reminding myself of is, when I set a goal, I might fail many times on the way to getting there, but each failure should help me. Each failure should teach me that I'm still the best person to achieve that goal. And so it is with building a company. So it is with building a team that's trying to do something big. Just remember that, you are still the person to do it. One failure is not going to push you away from it. So you're going to have some.
I love it. Drew Houston has a quote.
Yeah.
Don't worry about failure because you only have to be right once.
One time. Yeah. That's right. That's awesome. Thanks, guys. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much again. Where can we find you online, Prosper?
Oh, geez. I do not have an official blog yet, but I'm on LinkedIn. I do plan to start writing more, but as of now, LinkedIn/Prosper Nwankpa, whatever that LinkedIn thing is.
We'll throw it into the link drop. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
That's it for the Op Show. Take us out, Kyle.
Thanks, Prosper.